that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
There's something that's oddly fascinating about Jimbo. She's one of the most unique queens that we've seen on the modern era of the franchise, with a drag style that takes on various different characters and aesthetics that has had fans either living for her performances or having issues with the way she sometimes expresses himself artistically. Regardless, after Jimbo was on Ukvstheworld, his career skyrocketed, allowing her to become one of the new main figures within the fan favorites of the show. So, in this video, I'm going to go into the story of the drag clown that is Jimbo. But before we start, please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and follow me on Twitter at GreenGayYT for updates on future videos. Now, let's begin. Like most drag queens, Jimbo grew up occasionally dressing in his mom's clothing, eventually growing up to find himself as the entertainer that he is today. Now, when Jimbo describes himself as a drag clown, he isn't joking. As Jimbo grew up, he developed a key interest in performance-based theater. Eventually, Jimbo attended clown school, which yes, it's an actual thing. At clown school, Jimbo learned about the art form of clowning. This era of his life was significant because it helped him gain valuable performance skills in terms of how to frame a show for an audience, by playing with their expectations through a creative approach. And so he used his love for clowning and fused it together with his love for drag, and thus Jimbo was born. I think that now that there's been dozens of new Drag Race seasons over the past years, we are seeing how a lot of the new queens will be reminiscent of past contestants, which isn't their fault. There's just such a large repertoire of queens to choose from that it's almost accidental that our minds are going to compare them to each other. After all, with over 200 queens that have participated on the show, it's natural that there will be personalities or aesthetics that are parallel to each other. But that's what makes queens like Jimbo so special, who've managed to bring their own unique art to the international stage. And Jimbo actually ended up achieving a pretty good name for herself, despite being a queen whose original season was the Canadian franchise, which is the start of Jimbo's Drag Race journey. Canada's Drag Race Season 1 was announced in the summer of 2019, and by November 2019, they had filmed their first ever season. While this was happening, it didn't take long before the Nancy Drews of Reddit began listing out the queens who might have been cast on the show. I remember this time period because many queens all over Canada were spilling tea on which queens might have been the ones that got the call. What's funny is that while Jimbo was filming Drag Race Canada Season 1, a producer told him about how everyone on Reddit had pretty much figured out the whole cast, but they couldn't figure out who the 12th queen was, meaning that Jimbo was the only queen that the Nancy Drews were having trouble figuring out was in the cast. This was because prior to Drag Race, Jimbo wasn't a very well-known queen within the Canadian drag community. By the summer of 2020, the first episode of Canada's Drag Race aired, and Jimbo was among the fan favorites of the season from the get-go, thanks to his oddly captivating workroom entrance.
Okay.
And while this was surprising to Jimbo, she recalls having a conversation with Tynomi Banks while on the set, and asked Tynomi if she thought that Jimbo would end up getting fans when the show aired, to which Tynomi thought to herself that Jimbo was guaranteed to have a strong following. In season 1 of Canada's Drag Race, Jimbo had a competitive energy that was always present in the room. She was a queen that was focused and determined to meet the challenges, but part of her storyline was that she barely got the praise from the judges that she was working so hard to get. It's no secret that the judging on Canada Season 1 upset a good portion of the fan base that tuned in every week to be really confused by what the judges had decided was worthy of a challenge win or which queens were up for elimination. Essentially, the season had a good stack of Canadian queens, but was criticized for its strange judging decisions. In particular, fans felt that Jeffrey Boyer-Chapman was a lot more negative to the queens when it came to critiques. The issues that fans had with Jeffrey's way of judging was that it came across as someone that was being super bratty, with no actual constructiveness to their critiques. He also seemed to be trying to imitate RuPaul's way of speaking, a little bit too much, which made most of what he said not feel very genuine. On the other hand, Stacey McKenzie was the nice judge, while Brooklyn Heights was the impartial judge. Jimbo has said that while Jeffrey was one of the judges that seemed to not really understand Jimbo's point of view when it came to his approach to the challenges, the fans shouldn't have come after him online the way that they did. Because at the end of the day, Jeffrey is still a human being that was just playing the role of a bad judge to make entertaining TV. Shortly after the airing of season 1, Jeffrey ended up going on somewhat of a hiatus, and by the time production for season 2 began, it was announced that Jeffrey Boyer-Chapman would not be returning as a judge. And it seems it must have been his decision to not return, due to how negatively he was received by the fans. The whole point of a judging panel is to have individuals giving their personal opinions on the way contestants perform during a competition. And sometimes it's even better when the judges have a complete opposite perspective of what the general consensus of a look was, because it gives the audience a little something extra to think about. But it's this negative reception from the judges that would create some very memorable memorable moments with some of the queens from the season, especially by the time we were halfway through the competition, such as the infamous altercation between Jimbo and Rita Baga. It all started after Jimbo had received some not very good critiques about her runway outfit. Once they all went back to the workroom to untuck, Jimbo was a volcano ready to explode. As the queens were talking, Rita Baga seemed to inadvertently throw shade at Jimbo when she asked Jimbo if she purposely meant to look older than she was with the makeup choices that she made, only for Jimbo, who was already stressed out in the competition, to just blow up at her and read her to filth.
Your lace line looks like Arv. Your hair is fried. A wig should go directly in the garment. Oh, the girls are fighting! I mean, your hair looks like a grandma just dunked her head in the toilet.
It's interesting because this moment is sometimes referred to as an example of Jimbo being a bad person, which granted, the things that she said were straight up savage, so it's clear that she isn't a Miss Congeniality by any means. But that being said, why is it so bad to have a shady queen every now and then that stirs up drama? Fans will get mad at a queen for being shady to another Drag Race contestant, only for them to go and send hate to the queen of a season that they don't like happened with Rita Baga, who towards the end of season 1, despite being in the top 3 and having the best track record, knew that she wasn't gonna win due to how disliked she was by the fans. And I think it's awesome that the fan base is able to rally together behind a queen, but it seems that these outbursts of love are always rooted in the tearing down of someone else. Once we get to the top 4 episode of Canada's Drag Race season 1, the 4 queens left were Priyanka, Rita Baga, Scarlett Bobo, and Jimbo. The guest judge for this week was Michelle Visage, who was able to fly into Canada as the ambassador of the United States. According to Jimbo, prior to Michelle Visage giving critiques to the queens, production told Michelle a lot of information about how each of the queens had been doing in the competition, along with showing looks to Michelle from past runways and even each contestant's Instagram. Jimbo felt that this played a role into many of the critiques that were given by Michelle, which Jimbo felt had more to do with past weeks in the competition rather than what he had presented on the stage that day. This was also one of those questionable judging episodes, because the challenge was the winter ball, where they had to serve 3 looks, the third one being the one that they designed and made in the workroom. Out of these 4 final looks, Scarlett Bobo would end up being declared the winner, while Jimbo and Rita Baga were announced in the bottom 2. When Jimbo lip-synced against Rita Baga, it was her first time ever in the bottom 2, but while Rita ended up tearing her costume to be able to dance more, Jimbo kept his on, and you can see him struggling to keep his headpiece from falling down while he tries to give his best performance. Ultimately, Jimbo felt that he didn't want to tear away his costume in desperation because there was a part of him that wanted to keep his composure as a queen, which is why he didn't move that much in the lip sync. And unfortunately, by the end of the episode, Jimbo would end up being eliminated, placing 4th. Looking back, Jimbo wishes that she had focused more of her time in the workroom on adding final details to her outfit, because she actually ended up helping Scarlett Bobo, who was struggling to figure out her own look, only for Scarlett to end up winning the challenge at the end of the episode, which sort of reminds me of when Aja helped BB with making her outfit, only for BB to win and Aja to go home. Jimbo also wishes he would have made some sort of tearaway so that he would have had more mobility during the lip sync, but as we later find out in Ukvstheworld, Jimbo would have trouble performing any lip sync regardless of how freely he was able to move. Which brings us to what really began to change things for Jimbo's career, which was Ukvstheworld. I think that anyone that had watched the international seasons of Drag Race was super intrigued to see the way that RuPaul was going to react to queens that he had not judged on the original seasons. Particularly for Canada, Lemon and Jimbo were the first representatives, so there was a lot of hype built around them. And watching Ukvstheworld, you can really tell that Jimbo was being appreciated by the judges a lot more than she had been on her original season. But it wasn't just that. Jimbo came to Ukvstheworld with a completely different package than what we had seen before. Her makeup style had drastically changed for the better, and her runway looks were extremely elevated. It was clear that she had come to give everything she had to win the crown, which honestly most of the queens on this season truly gave it their all with their runway packages. Now there's very few moments throughout the airing of this franchise that I've wanted to be able to experience watching for the first time ever again, and one of them is Jimbo's talent show. I think there was a universal silence as we all watched the premiere episode of Ukvstheworld and saw Jimbo go up on the main stage in front of RuPaul to perform one of the most bizarre concepts to be brought to the franchise. Not only was Jimbo's look in itself bizarre, but at one point it felt like a fever dream to see Jimbo throw a bologna slice at Ru, only for RuPaul to actually catch it. Whether you'd like to admit it or not, it takes guts to go on the stage and perform something so out of left field that it's going to be a complete hit or miss. I mean, we know now that RuPaul doesn't just laugh at something just because it's absurd. You have to possess an X factor that goes just beyond your talent. An example of this is Irene Dubois from season 15, who tried playing with that aspect of absurdness but ended up just failing badly and being eliminated. Now, Jimbo's talent show character is called Casper the Balloony Ghost, and it's actually been a character that he's performed throughout many years in her hometown of Victoria, British Columbia.
To create something that lives and dies in that moment and is witnessed by the audience is something that's really special.
But if you really want to get deep, Jimbo says that in a way his talent show performance is an art piece in itself that tells the story of every queen's internal fear of getting on RuPaul's Drag Race, finally being on the world stage, and having no talent to show the world. Which is why he comes out with a box that's labeled talent, only for him to open it and find that there's nothing inside, which then sends the character into a mild panic. Only for Casper the Balloony Ghost to unzip his crotch and see that there was baloney inside him that ends up turning into the main entertainment of the show. This represents how even though you think you may not have talent, instead your true talent can exist deep inside you, like a baloney slice. But that's just one perspective, so. What would go on to be highlighted in this season is how successful Jimbo had become at translating his humor through to the judges. And this time he had gotten the approval of RuPaul, who automatically gravitated towards Jimbo's sense of humor. I mean, it was clear that RuPaul loved interacting with Jimbo after he placed in the top 2 for 2 episodes in a row. Only there was one problem. Jimbo is not a good lip syncer. Seeing Jimbo lip sync was weird. I mean, the queens always have the option to change their outfits for the top 2 lip sync, but she didn't do that. Along with that, she was wearing super high heels, so it wasn't a shocker when she ended up almost falling on Pangina. Although, even fashion-wise, Jimbo brought it to the runway. Well, there was some weird makeup mistakes, like her episode 1 runway where the black paint just sort of detracted from the look. I definitely prefer her alternate take that she did after filming was done. After all, by the next episode, she ended up showing a good repertoire of the looks that she'd be able to serve. But unfortunately, it felt like the writing was on the wall when by the end of episode 2, Jimbo was once again placed in the top 2, and while she did do a slightly better job in the lip sync than the week prior, she still didn't manage to do a good enough performance to make her an official winner and earn her a repeater badge. And so by episode 3, Jimbo would land in the bottom 2 with Jujubee, after not doing a very good job in the role that she had chosen to play for the Rusical. It was a shocker as well to see that Pangina, the winner of the challenge, had chosen to eliminate Jimbo. And while it was sad to see Jimbo go, it was still cool to see a contestant like Pangina make such a bold decision. Jimbo's mirror message for this season was, quote, "My name is Pangina and I'm a stupid idiot. P.S. I love you all. P.S.S. except Jimbo." This was of course a message that seemed very bitter, but at the same time, it's normal for contestants to feel bitter about something they put so much work into. Although some viewers felt personally offended by the ways in which Jimbo would sometimes interact with Pangina heels, feeling that his behavior was borderline rude. But their complaints are mostly just based on their own internalized hurt, because Pangina and Jimbo have both collaborated on projects together after the airing of the show, and have been vocal about how their relationship is doing just fine. Both queens have expressed a deep respect for each other and are also thriving, being booked and blessed since the season aired. Now, as we know, the Ukvstheworld fan reception was for the most part very negative. People did not like to have to see Lemon, Jimbo, and Pangina heels be eliminated back to back, while at the same time Jujubee being able to seemingly breeze through every episode despite the fan consensus always being that she should have gone home. Jujubee had such an odd run on Ukvstheworld, mostly because it was pretty unexpected how poorly she would do throughout most of the season. Her talent show, while she would end up being safe, wasn't the most riveting, being that we had just seen her a year prior in All Stars 5 deliver virtually the same type of talent. By episode 2, she was placed in the bottom 2 after showing off some not very good fashion choices. But despite this being Jujubee's 4th time competing, Janie Jacquet, the winner of the challenge, chose to eliminate Cheryl Hole. In a press interview, Jimbo said that she felt that when Jujubee came back for Ukvstheworld, she didn't go into it with as much effort as she had done in previous seasons, but that it could have been a product of just sheer exhaustion. Jimbo also acknowledges that Jujubee could have been facing some financial difficulties, since they were still coming out of the pandemic by the time the season was being filmed. But ultimately, Jimbo felt that maybe Jujubee's good enough just wasn't good enough. This interview was actually pretty controversial, because Jujubee would end up talking about it in an interview just a couple weeks later, where Jujubee mentioned that she was displeased with the comments that Jimbo had made about her during his exit interview, and that she had read headlines about how Jimbo felt that Jujubee hadn't put her best effort into the season. And as a result of the interview, interview, a bunch of fans came for her. There's been other interviews that Jujubee has done where she said that she wasn't in the right mindset to prepare for the season, and was offended by the comments that Jimbo had made about her preparation for the contest, when most fans were already talking about how Jujubee's run felt sort of off, especially when it came to a lot of the runways. And while it's true that it's subjective to say whether Jujubee's run was good or not, to many people it really felt like such a stark letdown from what we had seen on All-Stars 5. But maybe that was the problem. We had just seen her. I feel like Shea Coulee had a similar problem after she won All-Stars 5. When she returned to All-Stars 7, there wasn't really a lot of her that had evolved, which maybe that's why she wasn't able to shine as much. Plus, even if it's true that the pandemic had a huge effect on the packages that the queens could present, it's hard to deny that out of everyone in the cast, Jujubee had arguably the most amount of resources at her fingertips, being that she was a US queen, a fan favorite, and had just come off of All-Stars 5. But speaking of conflicts between queens, there's a story about something that had allegedly happened while filming, but that it did not make the final edit of the show. The story goes that while the queens were together in the workroom talking about the elimination of one of the queens, MoHeart ended up giving a heartfelt story, supposedly about some of the struggles she had faced with intimacy in her early days, to which Jimbo had made a snarky joke regarding Mo's mother, something that MoHeart did not take lightly and called Jimbo out on it. This allegedly created a small yet heated argument between the two that almost escalated into a physical fight, but they did not air any of it. This led fans to theorize the severity of what it was that Jimbo said to Mo that was so disrespectful. To be honest, it's hard to know what the context of the situation was without seeing it. It also just feels weird the production would choose to omit a dramatic piece of television like that. But regardless of what the argument must have been about, it seems that there wasn't really any hard feelings between the two, when by the time Jimbo was eliminated, Mo was among the queens who gave her the parting hug. There was also apparently a fight between MoHeart and Blue Hydrangea that was cut, but there's no other information I found on that. Subsequently, in some press interviews after her elimination, Jimbo made statements to her fans to not send any hate towards Pangina about her decision. In fact, Jimbo felt that fans should take a step back and enjoy the show for the entertainment value that it is, and just laugh at the situation. In fact, she urged her fans to turn their energy into celebrating people rather than tearing them down. It also seems that while Jimbo was bitter on the circumstances surrounding both of his eliminations, there was also a part of him that expressed how he understood that at the end of the day, it's all just a game and not everything is meant to work out the way you want it to. It's also clear that the weakest part of Jimbo's skill set is that he isn't a good performer, which is a big part of succeeding at Drag Race, especially All-Stars. Even if he had made it to the finale, there wouldn't have been much hope for him to succeed, which is probably why there was always a lot more of an uproar when it came to Pangina Heels being eliminated, since she actually had the full package to be able to win the crown, even with a lip sync tournament at the end. What did become clear after this season is that I think that Jimbo fits a lot better under productions hosted by RuPaul than when she was on Canada's Drag Race, where the judges didn't understand a good portion of his humor or his point of view as an artist. So moving on to some mild drama, as Ukvstheworld was concluding its airing, Jimbo was touring all around the world and had elevated her drag aesthetic drastically, which makes sense since by this point it had been almost a whole year since they had filmed the season. But there was a small debate that was forming with a small portion of the fanbase that felt offended by the way Jimbo was performing as his drag character. According to Banter Online, Jimbo's characterization of his drag character depicts women through basic stereotypes, like having massive boobs and behaving like a blonde bimbo, which of course was reflected through an almost cartoonish silhouette that had become signature to Jimbo's style, or dancing to songs while jiggling his big breastplate. Along with that, when he speaks in his drag character, it will resemble a stereotypical dumb blonde personality that is super slutty. Thus, the fans that felt offended by his new drag aesthetic voiced their concerns online, citing that there should be more intelligence behind his drag, and that it's offensive for a cis gay man to partake in making fun of women's stereotypes or objectifying their bodies. Yet, there's plenty of queens whose aesthetic involves having big exaggerated boobs. Along with that, Jimbo wanting to behave like a dumb blonde is also not unique. I mean, even as recently as season 15, we have Sugar and Spice whose drag personas are literally dumb blonde bimbos. In an interview with Joey Nolfi from Entertainment Weekly, which was done shortly after Jimbo's elimination on Canada's Drag Race, Jimbo was asked about the slutty aspect that's added to many of his performances, to which Jimbo explains that the theme of sexuality and being slutty is pretty strong in his life, due to how repressed it was for most of his his growing up. His drag is supposed to push boundaries by poking fun at the social ideals of femininity. In fact, it's supposed to empower people to not take someone who feels powerful in their sexuality as a negative thing, because usually society will shun women who want big boobs or behave in a flirtatious manner. So people shouldn't be slut-shaming. The drama surrounding this topic seemed to intensify when Victoria Scone made a series of tweets that started off with her saying, quote, "I understand that sometimes the obsession with breast and drag can be a love letter to women, but it's really not feeling like that," which fans directly assumed was about Jimbo. That's when a couple hours later, Victoria elaborated, saying that while she appreciates when breastplates are used artistically, they shouldn't always be the punchline of every joke or the basis of the whole act, which is a juxtaposition in itself, since really any use of breastplates would fall under artistic expression, and it really just comes down to personal preference in drag styles, as she points out that people do have a right to dislike something. But she also goes on to add that when she sees breastplates being used in a certain way, it makes her as a woman feel uncomfortable. Yet in the next tweet, she says that she enjoys intellectual type of humor, and that dancing around in a breastplate isn't remotely thoughtful, artistic, or even funny. She ends the series of tweets with, quote, "I love drag so much. I really do. I'm not attempting to tell or advise anyone what to do. Go forth and wear the breastplate, but maybe we could do a little better with what we do with them." This was sort of controversial, with some fans agreeing with Victoria, while others felt that her tweets seemed to send the message that if, according to her, all forms of drag are valid, then why does it seem that she's trying to place limits on the art form? If drag queens shouldn't be using oversized breastplates in their performances, then how big are the breasts allowed to be? Should there be exact measurements all queens must now follow? These were all questions that the fans had once the conversation was unfolding online. As of recently, Simone, the winner of season 13, attended a red carpet event and did a look with extremely cartoonish big boobs. And for the most part, people didn't really care about the oversized breasts, and actually praised it for how exaggerated the whole look was, which of course makes it hard to know what the general stance on the topic of breastplates even is. But I'd be curious to hear what your guys' opinion is. The art form of drag has become something more than just a new genre in pop culture for people to be entertained over. It has currently become a hot topic within politics, with conservatives going after drag queens left and right to protest the freedom that people have with changing their gender identity, as well as gender expression. Recently, Jimbo was one of many Drag Race queens that was the target of conservative news outlets that attacked drag queens for supposedly exposing children to inappropriate performances. There's also been further conversations made by extremely conservative politics that drag altogether is misogynistic because it's gay men appropriating women's culture, or that men shouldn't even be allowed to freely express themselves in feminine ways. In today's climate, conservative parties are coming after drag queens as their first ticket into reforming LGBT rights under the law. In a way, people who find themselves instantly jumping to cancel a queen can unintentionally align themselves with that group of people. As of recently, in Tennessee, the Republican Party is trying to pass Senate Bill 3, which is a law that was introduced by Republicans to attempt to ban drag queens from performing. The bill itself states that any type of, quote, adult entertainment in public spaces where underage children might be present will be banned. This refers to any type of exotic dancers, strippers, but also male or female impersonators who provide entertainment, meaning drag queens. There's also no clear definition on the bill of what constitutes as a, quote, sexually explicit drag performance that is therefore adult themed. This article from NBC News also showcases a Tennessee drag queen named Veronica Electronica, who said that if the law is passed, she could potentially be committing a felony offense by just doing her job, because conservatives could start to point out that her breastplates are inherently sexual and shouldn't be worn, or that a cis man that wears a dress is automatically too sexualized to be around children. To top it all off, Tennessee is just one of 5 states in the US who are also trying to pass a similar bills. Now, despite all of this, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold queens accountable, but instead it should depend on the severity of what the offense was. But when we make the conversation not about Jimbo's art, but dwindle it down to the size of her breastplates, it plays into conservative talking points that all drag is inherently sexual. Although that does lead to the question, does having glamour and focusing an aesthetic around sexiness through big boobs and a bimbo attitude have more to do with artistic expression rather than an insult to women? Let me know in the comments. Also, Victoria Scone and Jimbo are doing perfectly fine, and even met up after the drama to show that they have no hard feelings towards each other. But it is is important to have conversations like these because it helps us obtain new perspectives. Now moving on, in the past year since the airing of Ukvstheworld, Jimbo has been very successfully touring all around the world, working with some of the brightest stars within the Ru Girl community. To top it off, you never really see any queens coming after Jimbo online, and it seems he's been able to build a pretty good reputation with the other drag queens. Jimbo has also recently been a guest on Pangina Heel's Wow Presents show, where they had a friendly conversation about their life after the show. Subsequently, there's been some pretty viable rumors that Jimbo is going to be competing on the upcoming All Stars 8 season that has yet to officially be announced. This once again solidifies that there's something special that Jimbo possesses, and it's clear that RuPaul, who nowadays barely seems to remember queens' names without reading off the teleprompter, felt intrigued enough by Jimbo to want to invite him once more to compete on the show. In conclusion, these days there's been very few drag queens that engulf themselves into a truly outlandish personality that goes beyond just being a drag queen and subverting people's expectations on a constant basis. Jimbo's drag is an example of an aesthetic that is exciting to see whenever you see him on the runway, and he's among one of the most successful Canadian queens to achieve international stardom. Yet it's clear that Jimbo's odd personality and approach to things is not everyone's cup of tea. And that's okay, because that's the whole point of drag, to make us question reality itself. I wanted to take a moment to thank my patrons. In the Elite Pink Squad, we have Matthew Burns, Gay Uncle, and Wendell Norris Realtor. And in the Green Squad, we have Azure, Emma Malander, Common Rider Furry, Franny Fishsticks, Edgar Allan Pup, O Nicole, The Only Sean, Soy Pablete, LP, and Billy Gooden. You guys are the icons of the channel and are officially part of my winner's circle. And if you'd like to see your name on the screen, you can support me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video and comment below what you thought about it. Follow me on Twitter at GreenGayYT for updates on future content, and I'll see you guys next time.